Hi, everyone. This lecture's on personality theory for Intro to Psychology. And let me share my screen. Okay. So, what is personality? Personality is a set of behavior and emotional and cognitive tendencies that people display over time and across situations. In other words, it's everything you do and who you are and how you act, what you think, all of these things. Again, behavioral, emotional, or cognitive, anytime, any day, any year. So when you think of different types of personality, we literally can list 600 different types, just different adjectives, semantics, if you want to say that. But someone might be outgoing, somebody might be shy, an extrovert, someone may be condescending, someone may be a glasses half full, glasses half empty kind of person, etc. So we're going to look at Freud first. So the iceberg model is a really good model to think of Freud. When you think of the iceberg, like at the top, that's the smallest part. And he compares that to our ego, the thing that we know and we remember. The preconscious is either slightly above the waterline and below the waterline when we use the iceberg model. It's much bigger. There's stuff that we have uh, that we know about, but we're not thinking about at the same time. So if I said right now, you know, what are your feelings about elephants? I'm sure none of you were thinking about an elephant until I just said that. It would be scary if you were. But as soon as I said the word elephant, a picture popped in your mind, and your opinion of elephants was right there. So it's something you can bring to consciousness very easily. And then there's the unconscious level, and that's the hidden thoughts and desires that you have. And this is deep in the water and on that iceberg. It's also the biggest part of the iceberg. So it's the stuff that we don't know. This is the stuff he says comes out in dreams. So when I talk about this course, I always like to use some characters that we would understand. So I like to use The Simpsons as an example. So the id is there at birth. It's unconscious. It's the home to our sexual and aggressive drives, according to Freud. And it's governed by the pleasure principle. It's the me, I want, I want, I want. I don't care who gets, you know, tracked along the way. It doesn't matter. It's all about me. And I say, think Homer Simpson, because Homer was always just about him. The superego, which is the other end of the spectrum. So you have the id and then the superego, which develops later on in life. It's kind of our moral development. It's preconscious and unconscious, so slightly below the surface or unknown. And it develops in childhood and continues to develop because it's kind of the home to our morality, our idea of what is right or wrong. So it's run by the ego ideal, the best that we can be. And I always say, let's talk Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders would give the shirt off his back on The Simpsons for Homer. There's actually one episode where they were both out shoveling snow, and Ned has a coat and hat and gloves and everything prepared to shovel, and Homer has nothing and asked Ned if he can have his gloves and then eventually his hat and then his coat. And Ned gives everything over to Homer. So Homer's nice and warm, but then Ned is there freezing. So it's the absolute extreme of id, like the two extremes. And then we have the ego, which is kind of the balance between the two. It develops in childhood after the id, but before the superego. And I like to think Marge, when we think of the Simpsons, this referee between the id and the superego, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And what do we decide? That's the ego. So, giving an example of that, let's say, you want to buy a new car and you have the money for it because you've been saving it for your kid's education. The id would say, go spend the money, go spend the money, buy that car you want, buy that sports car, spend all the money. The kids don't deserve anything. The superego would say, no, 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 you're the parent. You have to take care of your kids. You've saved this money all this time. You can take the bus. And then the ego would be like, okay, look, we need a car. We don't need a sports car. We still want to help our kids go to college. So instead of spending, $200,000 on, a Lamborghini, you spend 40,000 on a nice car, hybrid, etc., that you can save some money on. But it's a practical car, and you still have money left over for your kids' education. So that's what we mean by the ego. It's that balancing. It runs on the reality principle. So Freud says in personality development, we actually go through different stages. He calls them his psychosexual stages. Each stage focuses on how we receive pleasure. And he says if we fail to pass through that stage, that can lead to a fixation. And what that means is anytime that we would be under stress, we may regress to that stage. So here they are. You should be familiar with them. The oral stage is birth to one. And of course, everything goes to the mouth of a little baby, right? That's how they receive pleasure. That's how they receive nourishment and food, comfort, etc. So the oral stage, they would say if this is not um, developed correctly, if you become fixated in this, we would see signs of that by some sort of oral fixation. You always have to have something in your mouth. You always have to chew things. You chew on your pencils, you chew on your cups. You have to chew ice. Um, Anything involving the, you know, act of chewing or receiving pleasure from your mouth. The anal stage is toilet training, and that's the only thing really children between 1 and 3 have complete control over is whether they go to the bathroom or not. So Freud says if you're toilet training your child, you shouldn't force them to go because that can cause, a fixation. But then again, you do have to set a time limit for them to go, or you're going to cause a problem in their development because that's going to be a fixation also that they never got through that ability to control their own, bowel movements. So they become fixated when they're older, if they're under stress, and that would be like someone who has OCD, someone who has to have all their ducks in a row, someone who has to be in complete control, almost like a narcissist. Okay. The phallic stage is 3 to 6, and again, it's kind of one of those questionable ones. It follows the Oedipus and the Electra complex back in mythology. So Oedipus killed his father so he could marry his mother. So the phallic stage, according to Freud, uh, the little boy really wants to have sex with their mom, but they can't because it's culturally not acceptable. It's taboo. So they look to their dad to grow up to be like their dad, so they will find a woman like their mom when they get older. The electric complex is the reverse, except it's for girls. Little girls really want to have sex with their dad, but they can't. So they look to the mom to grow up like their mom so they can have a person like their dad be in their lives when they're older. They would marry someone like their dad. Latency period is 6 to puberty, and there's basically nothing going on. This is the early school years. They learn to be friends. They learn to share and have empathy, etc. So it's just a general building time, but there's nothing in particular that causes um, anything really terrible if you would be fixated in this stage. There's nothing bad that typically is going on here. And then, of course, the last stage, the genital stage, according to Freud, we receive, pleasure from our genitals. And that's basically from puberty onward, since that's his last stage. So once you hit puberty, you're in this stage. Freud says we also have defense mechanisms, and there are actually 8 of them, but you're only responsible for 5 of those defense mechanisms. That's denial, projection, rationalization, repression, and displacement. Let's go through each. Denial, and we've all done it. Denying that you've done something can make you feel better about something, that you're not um, focused on it, like yet you did something wrong, because then that tells your psyche that, oh, you shouldn't have done anything wrong. So denial, you say, oh, no, I didn't take that cookie, or no, I didn't steal that piece of candy, something like that. It makes us feel better about ourselves, even though we did it, but we deny doing it, so it makes us feel better. Projection is when you project your thoughts out onto someone else. So follow along as I I want you to think of a person that you really don't like. Okay? Give you a second. Okay, now you've got that person. I want you to think about what characteristic does that person have that is the reason why you don't like them. What is that characteristic or characteristics that you don't like? And again, I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay. Now, what Freud's theory with projection is, the reason you dislike that person is because in reality you believe you have that characteristic. And since you can't stand that characteristic being part of you, you project it out onto someone else. And that's why you have that a sense of not liking that person. It's actually yourself that you don't want to have that. You think it's wrong, but you can't handle yourself having it. Uh, Rationalization, when we come up with reasons why we do things, even though, it's not necessarily a good reason, but we do it anyways. An example, let's say I didn't eat all day. I go home, I don't feel like cooking dinner, and I go, there's some things in the freezer. Let's look what's in the freezer. Oh, a little pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Oh, let me look at the calories on that. And I look on the calories, and there's 1,500 calories in this little container. And I think, wow, I didn't eat all day, so I haven't had any calories. I usually have 1,500 calories a day. I'm going to eat this little thing of ice cream all the way, all of it. I rationalize that it's okay to eat this entire container of ice cream that's 1,500 calories in one sitting versus, eating a nutritious meal that I may get lots of good things from my calories. Rationalization. Repression is when something happens to us that's so horrible to our psyche that we repress that memory. And well, 50% of the psychiatric and psychological community say this is a real thing, and about 50% say it is not. Um, there are things that can happen to people, especially children, that can be so horrible they don't know what to deal with. So therefore, they repress it. And when they're older, many times these start to come out in dreams, and they will actually begin to remember what happened to them. And the last one is displacement. And displacement is when um, you you're at work, let's say, and this argument happens at work where they accuse you of doing something, and you're really, really upset. You're really mad that something happened, and you want to really scream and yell at your boss, but you can't because you know you're going to get fired if you do that. So you displace it on someone else. Let me pause this for 1 second. Sorry about that. Change of class spell. So had to move location. It was going to get way too loud. Sorry. So let me go back to sharing. So let me give a better example for displacement. So so you have this argument at work, but your boss basically says horrible things about you. It's not true. You want to say something, but you know you can't because it's your job on the line. So you go home and your partner comes to the door and says, "Hey, you know, I thought maybe we'll just go out to dinner tonight." And you freak out and you go, "What? You couldn't even do this." And you're like screaming at them. You displaced all your anger onto that person who was innocent, didn't do anything. All that anger you kept stored up and gave it away, but to the wrong person. The person it should have gone to, of course, was your boss. We displace sometimes our emotions. So let's say you're in the sales industry and you have maybe a really, really rude customer. You have to watch that the next person who comes up that you don't displace what you're feeling because you know you wanted to tell that customer something and it wasn't going to be pretty, but you know you get fired. So you keep it bottled up. Next person comes along, they're the innocent person here. What do you do with that anger that you have? Carl Jung came along with the collective unconscious, his idea that uh, some things are just basically passed down through all of evolution, that we all share certain ideas and thoughts. He said that there are 12 archetypes, and these 12 archetypes represent 12 major personality characteristics. And people, if you think of like a pizza that's cut into 12 slices, the top of the pizza, if you're looking right at it, the top of the pizza, those things at the top, those pieces of pizza, those slices are similar. So we're going to like those people. The ones that are completely opposite, you know, of the other end of the pizza there, those people are so different from us and our characteristics, we typically don't like them. Alder says that there are about 15% of the population that strive for superiority. That means they strive to be better than everyone else, and they believe that they're better than everyone else, and they don't care who they put down along the way because they believe they're better than everyone else. The inferiority complex are the other 15% at the other extreme that don't think they can do anything right. They don't give themselves credit for anything that they do. And that's, an issue because everyone can do something, but they always put themselves down. Maybe you know somebody like that. I had a student one time who wrote this paper. It was like a 15-page paper. It only had to be 5 pages. And I was like really impressed because I just read the first. I'm like, wow, this is really very good. And she said to me, no, it's not my best work. I shouldn't turn it in. I'm like, this is really, really good. Very, very, very good. No, can I have that back? I think I want to edit it some more. And I'm like, this is fine. And she's like, no. So I gave it back to her and she ripped it up and threw it away. And I just kind of looked at her like, why did you do that? She's like, it just wasn't right. It's never good enough. And I'm like, talk about inferiority complex. So we had a long discussion about that. And she ended up doing another paper and it was 24 pages long. So I guess my discussion didn't necessarily completely solve the issue. Karen Horney. Yes, everyone always remembers Karen Horney because of her name. When we talk about Freud, Freud talked about uh, why women's characteristics, if they're opposite of what the stereotype is. So, in other words, at his time period, he thought women should be quiet and they should just work and they should take care of the men. And that's it. They shouldn't be aggressive or assertive. They shouldn't be demanding to work certain jobs, etc. He said women that do that actually really want to be a man. So really they want to have a penis. They really want to be a man. Karen Horney came along, get it? Penis horny, get it? That's why everyone remembers it. It's not penis envy. It's privilege envy. Women want the same rights that men have. In a male-dominated society, women want the same rights as a man. They want to be able to be assertive. They want to be able to do their best in any job that they would like to go after, etc. So remember, Karen Horney disagrees with Freud's penis envy theory. Other critiques of Freud, really hard to test, really broad claims, and his limited sample were, white female patients that were rich from 19th century Vienna. That's not a good population. It's definitely biased. And, he didn't even use men as part of his theory, but he applied it to them also. The humanists came along, and they're known for their positive aspects. They look at the goodness of a person. They believe that we all have free will and we make choices, but they are the complete opposite of Sigmund Freud's theory. It's, Freud is like hedonistic, and the humanists are more personal and reflective, etc. And because of, Freud's, oh, there's this id that makes you do things, the humanists don't agree with that. They believe we have a free will. There's nothing making you do anything. Two of the most famous humanists are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. We talked about Abraham Maslow in the video on emotions and motivation. So there is a hierarchy of needs, and the goal is to get to self-actualization. Excuse me. when we get to that goal, he says it's not going to be while we're still alive because we can always get better. We can always do things. Basic needs help. If we get the basic needs met, basic needs like food, water, shelter, air, then after that, we have safety needs that we feel comfortable. And it went up the pyramid. If you remember, we talked about that in a previous class. So that's one way of showing the theory on personality that's completely opposite of Freud. Then there's Carl Rogers. Yeah, he's the guy who kind of invented the self-esteem craze, unconditional positive regard. We should always look to the positive about ourselves and about other people. And there was this great character on SNL called Stuart Smalley. If you Google it, or if you take this YouTube video and type in Stuart Smalley, uh, you will. The best one, I think, was with Michael Jordan. You would want to watch that just to get a hint, because SNL always made fun of whatever the thing that was going on in the culture at the time. And this is when Carl Rogers' theory came out. So they do a really good job of mimicking it. But Carl Rogers says we should say positive things. We should do positive affirmations and say them every day. It's when, parents put little notes in their kids' lunch boxes, or everyone gets a trophy, or everyone gets a sticker, etc. Again, the criticism, how do you test if someone has a good regard for themselves or not? It's all up here. And it's also very idealistic that, there are no bad people, you know, only bad actions. And for the most part, most psychologists would agree with that, but there are some people that, you do have mass murderers, you have, people that have no no understanding of how human behavior works, so they take anything to the extreme. Uh, Again, not easy to prove. How do you prove this stuff? But it is out there, and it's much better in most cases than Freud stuff. But this is the one that we're all looking at now. This is the Big Five personality theory, and the easiest way to remember the Big Five personality theory is by the acronym OCEAN, OCEAN. So it's the first letter of each one of the Big Five theory. Openness to experience. Oh, excuse me. Openness to experience. Are you willing? Are you open to ideas? Or are you closed off and closed mind? And it's a sliding scale, so you fall somewhere on this scale. Okay. Conscientiousness, I'm going in order of the ocean. Undependable or dependable. Again, dependable is great. Undependable kind of states itself. But to talk about dependable, if you're so dependable all the time, sometimes you can be walked on. Uh, People can treat you like a doormat. Extremes in psychology are never the good thing. No extreme anywhere else, but even if it's a little bit away, the two extremes have the possibility of being something bad. Extroversion, straightforward, outgoing, or withdrawn. Okay. And then agreeableness. Do people get along with you, or people not get along with you? Let me give an example. Actually, one of my students gave me this story that they would always ask their girlfriend. They went out Friday nights, every Friday night, and always asked his girlfriend, "Well, where do you want to go out to eat?" And she'd go, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It's up to you. You pick." And he's like, well, I'd like you to go. She goes, everything's fine wherever we go. That's perfectly fine. It's like, okay, how about Olive Garden? Okay, yeah, that's great. So they go to Olive Garden, they get seated, getting ready to, you know, order, and she closes her menu, and he's like, "Wow, you already know what you're ordering." "Oh no, I'm not eating here. I don't like Italian food." "But why didn't you say something? We wouldn't have come to Olive." "Oh, I know you wanted to be here. I can just sit here and watch you eat, and I'll go home and make myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich." Well, may say, "Well, how is that? That's kind of being agreeable." The problem is when she went home, then she posted it on every type of social media what a jerk her boyfriend was, that he didn't know that she didn't like Italian food and didn't take her somewhere else. And even though she had the opportunity to tell him where to go for dinner, she chose to be, okay, yeah, these people will stab you in the back. Again, the two extremes. You would think agreeable is, hey, but you don't always know what they're thinking. And then neuroticism, stable or unstable. Stable would be constant or consistent at least. Unstable, it could show up sometimes, caring only about yourself, caring about others is on the back burner. In this case, if you're in a relationship with someone, you don't necessarily want someone who's neurotic, but at least if they're stable, you can predict what their behavior is going to be and choose to deal with it or not. If it's unstable, well, you don't know what you're in for. That may be a good day and may be a bad day. So sometimes you might want someone, not necessarily at the extreme, because we said extremes are bad, but maybe leaning toward the stable. And that's the big five personality theory. Almost done. How do we find out about people's personalities? Their questionnaires, paper form, computer. Computer's so much easier. It does all the statistics and tallying versus when we had to do them on paper. I'm from that generation. I remember having to do them on paper. It produces a personality profile. So if you've ever been on a dating site and you had to answer questions, what you were answering was a personality inventory. So many people have done them. They may not realize that's what they were, but many people have done them. It's looking for social desirability. What are those positive things that people are looking for? And then the computer will match other people who have those same positive traits. Now, the TAT, Somatic Aptitude Test, has a lot of questions and is one of the tests used for personality. One of the more controversial ones that always gets people's attention is the Rorschach test. And you can find all the Rorschach slides actually online if you're just curious. But this is one that we're going to do right now. The image that you see is an ink blot, and people who have intelligence are able to see images in this ink blot. So what do you see? I'll just wait a minute for you to think that as you look at it. So some of my students in the past have said they've seen two lions eating a power food, or two lions eating a man wearing a hat. Ostriches, they've said they've seen, or they look at the big hole and they see two faces looking out, or they see a big, like a masquerade mask, two alligators. There's so many possibilities here. None of those are what we would call red flag issues. A psychologist, if they were using this test, they would jot things down and look for patterns in the different ink blots. But something that would be a red flag, something that would come up, like being more specific, the lion's going, I see my parents eating and destroying me, and I'm just melting into the floor. Red flag. Yeah, that would be something that would be noted. And then the psychologist or the psychiatrist would look for that same type of pattern of the person feeling belittled or destroyed, physically, emotionally, psychologically by their parents. And that is it. So I hope you all enjoyed that little lesson. Any questions, feel free to contact me, and have a great day.